Hello, everybody. A lot of information today. So I'm going to talk about securing Jenkins with pod security policies. So keeping the security theme here. Also, just to give Jenkins a plug, running Jenkins on Kubernetes is really awesome. I know that Tecton is really cool, and Spinnaker actually works really well with Jenkins, and obviously Jenkins X is really cool, but there's still a lot of use cases where you need the flexibility that Jenkins still gives everybody, whether you're using Windows agents or deploying to legacy infrastructure and so forth, that Jenkins makes that really easy, but it's still great to run Jenkins on Kubernetes. However, security is a problem, especially when you're running across many, many teams. Now, I just wanted to add that these slides are available on the site, and there's a link at the top to a blog post because I'm not going to cover everything in 5 minutes. Also, if you want to come talk to me later today, or I'll be at the CloudBees booth the rest of the week, please come by if you want to talk about pod security policies in Jenkins or just best practices, Kubernetes best practices in general for Jenkins. All right, so does anybody not know what a pod security policy is? Everybody knows what a couple of you. Okay, so a pod security policy, basically it's a mission controller that's not enabled by default, but highly recommended. I do have to say that it is beta still, but it's supported by all 3 major cloud providers. But you do have to enable it. And basically what it does is it allows you to define a pod security policy resource, which is a cluster level resource, that says this is what containers that have this policy applied to it can do. And we're going to take a quick look at one of those that's very restrictive. If the container tries to do something that it doesn't have a pod security policy that lets it do it, Kubernetes will not start up that container. So why? So one reason, at CloudBees we have customers that have hundreds of Jenkins masters running on Kubernetes across, thousands of developers. You don't want to give them the opportunity to do something stupid that affects everybody else. Let alone, hopefully, you're using Kubernetes to do things besides run Jenkins, and you don't want to impact those workloads either. So really, it's just about reducing the blast radius. It's a great tool. You might as well use it. So here's a very restrictive pod security policy for Jenkins, the master itself that's running on Kubernetes, and the agents that spin up with Kubernetes plugin. First of all, setting the privilege to false will not allow Docker and Docker. Also, it doesn't allow escalation to be able to have an easier route to attack. Run as user. You should either run this as must run as non-root or run this as any range of 1 or higher. So again, not allowing root to run in the container, which is typically a common best practice. There are some caveats there, which are in my blog post that you can read about. Allow privilege escalation. Again, just reducing the blast radius. There's no reason you need privilege escalation to do most Jenkins jobs. If you do, isolate it in its own namespace with its own service account. Volumes. Don't allow mounting the host path. One thing that'll do is it won't allow you to mount the Docker socket if you're running Docker on your Kubernetes cluster as opposed to container D. Use annotations for both CComp and for AppArmor and set both of those to the default policy. That's just very simple. It's going to reduce a lot of security issues. Finally, I just wanted to highlight, if you do go and look at this and go to do this, well, one, you can read the blog post, but also be aware that by default, Jenkins Kubernetes agents with the Kubernetes plugin, they use an empty volume as the workspace. The empty volume is automatically attached with root with a permission set to 750. So if you're using a pod security policy that doesn't allow root, then your container is not going to be able to use the workspace. So basically what you have to do is set the security context on the pod template for your agents. By default, the Jenkins JNLP runs as user 1000, I believe. So if you just set the security context for user 1000, then everything's fine. Recently, the Kubernetes Agent plugin has added support for dynamic persistent volume claims. I haven't tried them out yet, but that might be another option. And then here is an example of you setting the pod template YAML to run as user 1000. And I might be one of the ones to finish early. Thank you.